That most notorious of unknown fiends, Jack the Ripper, terrified London in the autumn of 1888 and then disappeared into the winding grim lanes of Whitechapel, never to be exposed. Hundreds of suspects have been named in the decades since Jack's reign of terror, but none have been close to being proven as the serial killer. While the Ripper crimes only encompass 5 or 6 victims, a series of torso crimes which occurred at the same time, and which were similarly unsolved, have sometimes been linked to the Ripper, varying his method of doling out death. These crimes began in 1887, with a woman's dismembered body found at Rainham on the Thames. Parts of the body were recovered in May and June, although the head remained missing. In September 1888, a torso was found at Whitehall on a construction site. The building under construction was New Scotland Yard. Arms had been found in other suburbs, but again the head had been spirited away forever. During June 1889, a woman's body was recovered in 11 parts and identified as Elizabeth Jackson. Again, her head was never found. The fourth and last crime occurred in September 1889, when a woman's torso was found under a railway bridge in Whitechapel. Had the Ripper and the torso killer, whether they were the same individual or more, ceased killing? Or had they moved on from London to find fresh victims? Crimes bearing similarities to the Ripper murders were noted in Nicaragua and Germany in 1889, and in the murder of a New York prostitute named Carrie Brown in April 1891, among others. In Melbourne, Australia, on November 25th, 1892, at about 10:15 p.m, a parcel was observed lying on the footway at the corner of Manningtree Road and Power Street, Hawthorne. A man named Ponsford was escorting 2 women home when they saw the bag. Thinking it contained a dead infant, Ponsford saw the women home first, and if the bag was still there on his return, he would have contacted police. But by the time he got back, it was gone. In the interval, 2 sisters, a Mrs. Spinks and a Mrs. Underwood, virtually stumbled over the bag. It was an ordinary brand bag, securely fastened at the top, with a note written on thick brown paper pinned to it. It appeared a brush had been used to write the message. The note read, Lot 1, J. Ripper. The finders opened the bag to discover it held 2 adult human legs. Police arrived and satisfied themselves that they were human legs, and summoned Dr. Herbert Embling, who lived opposite the spot where the limbs were found. Police thought the legs, which still had blood running from them, were from a woman. Dr. Embling, however, disagreed and said they were a man's legs. He also added it appeared that the legs had been severed while their owner was still alive. Constable Davidson, who had had many years' experience in handling human bodies, concurred with the doctor that the legs had been cut off someone alive at the time. The limbs were taken to the morgue and placed on a slab. There Dr. Embling revised his opinion and said the legs were more likely cut off just after death. They had been severed slightly below the knee and wrapped in newspaper, which had become blood-soaked. Police were uncertain if a terrible crime had been committed by a maniac, or if a grim practical joke had been played by medical students, or the like. The legs were transferred to a tub of preserving fluid while investigations were underway. Opinion among those who viewed the legs was split between those who thought they came from a man and those who thought they were from a woman. A candidate for potential victim was proposed a few days after the discovery. A young man named James Edward Gray, aged 27, of a weak intellect, had gone missing from his home at South Melbourne on the 17th of November. Gray usually carried his money and bank book with him, and when last seen appeared excited about something. Gray's father, whom he lived with, attended the morgue and looked at the legs, but was certain that they were not those of his son. Police meanwhile checked on every person who had died in Melbourne in recent years to rule them out as far as possible as the source of the legs. A family living in Weinberg Road, now renamed Wattle Road, claimed to have heard a person yelling for help the night before the legs were found, but had been too afraid to go and check on the commotion. On the 30th of November, a second discovery was made, which further horrified Melbourne. A 25-year-old out-of-work painter named John Watkinson had been walking along Commercial Road beside Faulkner Park, running his fingers along the fence near the Alfred Hospital at South Yarra about 7:25 a.m. when he discovered a package laying underneath a tree. It was within 30 feet of the two gateways into the park and only yards from a lamp which glowed brightly through the night. The parcel would have been quickly noticed where it was, so it was presumed it had been left there in the early hours of the morning. Thinking it might be clothes, and being down on his luck, with a wife and child to provide for, Watkinson jumped the fence and went and opened the package. The smell that wafted up as he did so made him think he had instead found a dead baby abandoned in the park. However, wrapped in 2 layers of newspaper and a layer of canvas were 2 human arms, cut off below the elbow. They were described as having turned a green colour. The right arm was crackling from gases formed under the skin. He turned away in revulsion, dropping the parcel as he did so. Watkinson notified police, who retrieved the gory package. The arms appeared to have been cut off a body at the same time as the legs, so it was considered they came from the same person. The canvas was found to be packing cloth, 3 feet 1 inch by 2 feet 11 inches in size. The parcel was secured by a strip of coarse calico, 2.5 feet long. The newspaper inside the cloth covering were from 2 different papers, the Argus of the 12th of November and the Herald of the 23rd of November. Also found inside were a willow leaf in one hand and a pine stalk. Dr. Embling and Professor Allen were called in to examine the arms. They said they were most likely from a working-class man, but one who had not worked much recently. Both hands were stained with blood and had marks and abrasions, showing that the man had been in a fight before his death. The arms had been severed within 24 hours of death. It was inferred that the man was under 50 years of age, about 5'6" tall, and suffered from gout in life. The cartilage of the left wrist was greatly worn from manual labour. The left hand was tightly clenched, while the other was open. The skin was a fair colour, but sun-tanned, and had little hair. The hands were small with thick fingers. The thumb was odd in that it could not stretch very far from the index finger. That same day, Dr. Embling forwarded a report to the coroner, in which it was revealed that the legs had been severed by a succession of cuts, varying from under 2 inches up to 3 inches in length, following the line of the knee joints. The cuts showed no evidence of surgical skill. It is also evident that when the limbs were cut off, the body was laying on its back, the operator being on the left side. He was forced to turn the body over to complete the severance. Then, in connection with the right leg, the incisions apparently commenced on the outer side, the jagged ends of the individual cuts running forwards. On the front, the jagged ends ran inwards. On the inner side, they ran backwards. But at the back of the right knee, on the inner side, the operator was in difficulties. He made irregular cuts and evidently turned the body on its face. During the cutting, part of the tibia and some cartilage was sliced away from the body. There were 4 small scars on the back of the left leg, a little above the ankle. These scars were circular, smooth, and superficial. The largest was 1/2 inch across. The hair on the legs was not abundant, and there was a little fat under the skin of the legs. The muscles of the calves were large but flabby, and the feet were very small, the length of each being 9 inches. The arms found in Faulkner Park were cut in a very similar manner to the legs found at Hawthorn, convincing Dr. Embling that the same person had cut the limbs from the same body. The person who did so was powerful and wielded a heavy, sharp, narrow-bladed knife. Rigor mortis had set into the legs between 11 p.m. and midnight on the 24th of November, indicating that death must have occurred after midnight on the 23rd of November, and before the afternoon of the 24th. It was therefore supposed that dismemberment and packaging of the parts took place during the day of the 24th of November, 1892. The government offered a reward of £50 for information, which would alter to £100 if the case proved to be murder. One young man named Rosdell came forward to say he had seen a black man attempting to leave a parcel in drain pipes in Albert Park on the day before the arms were deposited at Fawkner Park. When he realised he was being watched, the black man feigned being drunk, retrieved the parcel and ran off in the direction of Fawkner Park. Rosdell watched the man go and noticed he stopped pretending to be staggering drunk once he was away from the park. On the 1st of December, a blind man came forward to say he thought the arms and legs could have come from another blind man who had been missing for 4 or 5 weeks. William Thomas Cooling said that a man named Patrick, or Thomas, Fox, had been an inmate at the immigrants' home with him and had gout and a peculiarity of the thumb, like the arms. He was also known to carry around a twig with leaves on it with him. Fox was about 50 or 55 years old. Another lead came from a couple of acquaintances of James Adams, lately deceased, and buried in Melbourne Cemetery. They were certain the legs were his, so police exhumed the grave on the evening of the 7th of December, but found Mr. Adams fully intact, and within a half hour his body was reburied. As the days unfolded, nothing further was learned which could solve the mystery. Police, who thought that a murder had occurred, had expected to find the trunk and head of the dead man, but nothing was reported found. On the other hand, many believed the arms and legs were a twisted joke. It was conjectured by the press that a vagrant had been found dead of natural causes, and some sick trickster had cut off the limbs to dump in public places to cause a sensation. The matter was not resolved either way. Had Jack the Ripper emigrated to Victoria and committed a torso murder of an unknown man? The note found with the legs was largely forgotten and very little mentioned after the first few days of the case. Or maybe it was the Thames torso killer, for like those crimes, no head was ever recovered in the Melbourne case. The crime itself, if it was one, remained unsolved. It was briefly recalled in 1898 when a young woman's dismembered corpse was recovered from the Yarra River, but that turned out to have no connection to the earlier mystery. At least one candidate for the Ripper certainly lived in Melbourne. Frederick Deeming, who killed his wife and 4 children in England in 1891, and who then killed his second wife in Melbourne in 1892. For the later crime, he was hanged at Melbourne Jail on the 23rd of May, 1892. Like the Whitechapel crimes, the Hawthorne mystery of 1892 will haunt forever the dark corners of history.